Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at the life and service of a man named Joe Young. He really embodies this spirit of quiet strength and dedication to helping others. And we're going to kind of follow his journey from his college days, where he faced some financial hardship, to his long career with Southern Bell, and then on to his volunteer work with Meals on Wheels. And one of the things about Joe that really, I think, is going to grab you is that even when things get tough, he's got this way of finding humor and bringing a smile to everyone's face. So Joe is just one of those guys who gets things done quietly, diligently, always working, always lending a hand. He's just a no-nonsense kind of guy. You know what I mean? But at the same time, he has this really deep compassion for others. It's a really interesting mix. Have you ever met anybody like that?
It's fascinating, that sort of quiet strength. We often overlook that. In our culture, that seems to really value the loudest voices in the room. But when you really think about it, that real leadership and impact doesn't always come from, outward charisma. Sometimes it's about that steady dedication, the consistent effort to make a difference, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. And to really understand Joe, I think we need to go back to his college days at Miles College. And Miles College itself has a pretty amazing history. It was founded by the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church back in 1898. And it was named after Bishop William H. Miles, who was a former slave who just embodied perseverance in a way few can imagine. I mean, can you imagine that for a second? A former slave who helps found a college. It just says so much about the power of education and the drive to create a better future. And it was at Miles College where Joe's own journey of resilience really began. He initially chose Miles because he was promised a job at this brand new black-owned supermarket, a chance to support himself while getting an education. But life had other plans, as it often does. The friend who was managing the store, he got sick, and suddenly Joe's left without a job and facing those daunting college expenses.
Yeah, that's tough for anybody, especially in those formative college years. It really forces you to sink or swim.
Right, and Joe being Joe, he didn't give up. He juggled this grueling early morning shift at UPS with his studies, pursuing a business administration degree. And then he even added a full-time gig as a skycap, with United Airlines working the late shift. Talk about dedication, right?
Yeah.
And you can wonder, was there this subconscious pull towards unity in his path? You got UPS, you got United Airlines, later even United waving Meals on Wheels. It's a curious pattern, isn't it?
It is, and it's interesting how you bring up, the historical context of HBCUs. They weren't just about providing education. They were about fostering leadership and resilience. Within a system that often worked against Black Americans, they created a space for unity and upliftment. So perhaps Joe's choices reflect that, that deeper yearning for connection and shared purpose.
That's a really good point. It adds another layer to understanding Joe's motivations. Now, after graduating, Joe continued working with United Airlines for a little while, before taking a position as a utility worker at Southern Bell. And anyone who knows Joe wouldn't be surprised to hear that he wasn't content just staying in any job. He set his sights higher. And over the next 32 years, through sheer hard work and determination, Joe climbed the ladder at Southern Bell and eventually landed a management role. It's a story we hear sometimes, that classic tale of ambition and perseverance. But even after retiring from Southern Bell, Joe's dedication to service, it didn't fade away. It actually seemed to intensify. It's like this drive to help others is just woven into his very being. At his church, he wears multiple hats: Sunday school teacher, superintendent, trustee, board chairman. He's always involved, always lending a hand. He even jokes that he always kind of got dumped into things, which to me really speaks volumes about his natural leadership qualities. It's like people just instinctively sense his reliability and his willingness to step up.
I'm really curious about that, this idea of him being dumped into things. Do you think there's a connection between his quiet nature and the way he takes on these leadership roles? It's almost as if his actions speak louder than words, and people recognize that.
That's a great point. It's like he embodies that idea of leading by example without even realizing it.
Yeah.
And that brings us to Joe's volunteer work with Meals on Wheels, which is where his quiet strength and compassion, I think, really shine through. Now, for those who aren't familiar, Meals on Wheels is an incredible program that delivers nutritious meals to seniors who can't easily leave their homes. But it's so much more than just food. It's about combating senior isolation and making sure they have a lifeline to the outside world. What are your thoughts on that, knowing Joe as well as you do?
Well, knowing Joe, I imagine he takes that responsibility very seriously. It's not just about, dropping off a meal. It's about those small moments of connection, the chance to just brighten someone's day, even for a few minutes.
Absolutely. And Joe's been volunteering with him since 2014. And let me tell you, he goes above and beyond in ways that might surprise you. There have been times when he's had to call paramedics For seniors who have fallen or were having a medical emergency, he's even stayed with them until help arrived. It's like he really embodies his father's advice too. Always try to help as many people as you possibly can.
That commitment to going the extra mile is so admirable. It speaks to the impact one person can have, even without, seeking recognition or fanfare. Quiet strength in action, right?
Absolutely. And what really strikes me is that Joe isn't just fulfilling a need. He's actively looking for ways to make a difference, to truly connect with the people he serves. And that leads us to an aspect of Joe's personality that you might not expect, his sense of humor.
Oh, that's right. That's one of the things that makes him so unique. It's not just about telling jokes. It's about using humor to ease tension, to make people feel comfortable and valued.
Exactly. He has this way of using his kind of dry wit to lighten the mood. And he creates these moments of genuine connection. It's like he intuitively understands the power of laughter, especially in the face of adversity. And he once said, if I can say something to make them smile, I feel good about it. What do you make of that?
I think it speaks to the power of finding joy in service. It's not about, drudgery or obligation. It's about finding those moments of lightness and connection that make the work meaningful. And it reminds me of something we discussed earlier of, the historical context of resilience and humor within the Black community. It's a way of finding light in challenging situations, a way of coping and connecting.
That's such an important point. And it makes me think, sometimes the people who are most dedicated to serving others are the ones who find the most joy in it. It's like their own cup gets filled in the process. And it brings up a good question for our listeners. Have you ever noticed that in your own life? When you extend a hand to someone else, does it somehow lift your own spirits as well? It's something to think about. Now, we've talked a lot about Joe's actions, but I'm curious to hear more about the impact he's had on the people he serves. What have you learned about the connections he's made through his work with Meals on Wheels?
That's a great question, and it leads us to some truly heartwarming stories. Joe shared how humbling it is to witness the challenges his clients face, and to realize the impact even small acts of kindness can have. It's not about the grand gestures. It's about those seemingly insignificant moments that can make all the difference.
And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive into Joe Young's life. We'll delve into those specific moments, the ripple effects of his actions, and what we can all learn from his quiet but profound approach to making a difference in the world. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Joe Young. Just before we left off, we were talking about those small acts of kindness that Joe weaves into his work with Meals on Wheels, and how, even the smallest gestures can have such a ripple effect. We talk a lot about the importance of social support systems for seniors, especially those who are facing health challenges or, living alone. Joe's story really brings that to life, doesn't it?
It does. And as our population ages, that demand for services like Meals on Wheels, it's only going to increase. It's crucial to recognize how vital those programs are, for the well-being of our senior communities, providing not just nourishment, but that connection to the outside world, a sense that somebody cares.
Yeah, and I think that's what really resonates so deeply with me about Joe's story. It's like he understands that human connection is just as important as the meal itself. He's not just dropping off food. He's delivering a moment of joy, a bit of interaction.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly powerful, especially for someone who might be, isolated or lonely.
Yeah, and it's not something that requires any special skills or training. It's just that willingness to engage, to listen, to share a smile or a kind word. We can all do that, regardless of our background or circumstances. Have you ever noticed how just a simple act of kindness from a stranger can just brighten your entire day?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes it's those unexpected moments of human connection that make the biggest impact. And what's interesting is that, Joe doesn't just bring this kindness to his work with Meals on Wheels. It seems to be like a thread that runs through his whole life. Yeah. Remember we talked about how he was always getting dumped into leadership positions at his church, Sunday school teacher, superintendent, trustee, board chairman. It's like he just naturally gravitates toward those roles where he can serve others.
It makes me wonder if there's a connection there between his quiet nature and his effectiveness in those roles. Perhaps because he's not seeking the spotlight, People just trust him more. That quiet confidence, that willingness to lead by example.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way, but it makes perfect sense. He embodies that saying, actions speak louder than words. He's not about, making pronouncements or charismatic speeches. He's about quietly getting things done and consistently showing up for the people he cares about.
And that consistency is so important, especially in leadership. It's about building trust, demonstrating reliability, being someone people can depend on.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes me think about something we touched on earlier, the potential downsides of Joe's quiet approach.
Mm.
Do you think there's a risk there that his selflessness could lead to him being taken advantage of? It's something to consider.
That's a really insightful point. It's like anything else, there needs to be a balance. Selflessness and compassion, those are admirable qualities. But it's also important to set boundaries and prioritize self-care, and that can be especially challenging for people like Joe, who are just naturally inclined to put others first.
That's so true. It's about finding that sweet spot between giving wholeheartedly and preserving your own well-being. And it makes me curious about Joe's own reflections on this. Has he ever talked about the challenges of maintaining that balance?
He hasn't explicitly addressed that, but he has talked about the importance of finding joy in service. It's not about draining yourself or becoming a martyr. It's about finding those moments of connection, those shared experiences that make the work meaningful.
And that brings us back to Joe's unique sense of humor. It's not just about making people laugh. It's about, creating a sense of ease, of shared humanity, using humor to connect on a deeper level. I wonder if that playfulness, that lightness of spirit, is part of what allows him to give so generously without feeling depleted.
That's a fascinating thought. Maybe it's that ability to find humor in those everyday situations that helps him maintain perspective and avoid burning out, like a built-in resilience mechanism.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes me think about those times when we face challenges or feel overwhelmed. Maybe a little dose of humor is exactly what we need to lighten the load, to remind ourselves that it's okay to not take everything so seriously.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that service doesn't have to be somber or self-sacrificing. It can be joyful, it can be lighthearted, it can be filled with, moments of laughter and connection.
And then that brings us back to those specific moments, the ripple effects of Joe's actions that we talked about earlier. I'm eager to hear more about the impact he's had on the people he serves, those stories that illustrate, the power of his quiet strength and compassion.
Those are the stories that will truly inspire us. Stories of connection, of resilience, of the enduring power of human kindness. So let's dive into those next.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Joe Young. Before we went to the other segments, we were talking about how Joe's quiet strength and compassion just create these ripples of positive impact. And it's easy to, get caught up in the big idea of making a difference. But sometimes we forget that it's really the everyday acts of kindness that really matter.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We often think that we need some kind of big platform or to make some grand gesture to really make an impact. But Joe's life shows us that. It's really those small things, those seemingly insignificant moments that have the most profound ripple effect. A listening ear, a helping hand, even just a warm smile. Those are the things that can really change someone's day.
Yeah, and that's what's so inspiring to me about Joe's story. It's like he doesn't wait for some, big opportunity to come along. He just shows up every day, rain or shine, and quietly makes a difference in the lives of the people he encounters. For years, he drove that Meals on Wheels route, covering this huge area of Jefferson County. And I can't help but think, for some of those folks, Joe might have been the only person they saw that day, the only person who took the time to ask how they were doing, to share a laugh, to offer just a little bit of human connection.
Yeah, it's so easy to underestimate the power of those simple interactions. But, for someone who's isolated or lonely, a friendly face and a kind word can be a lifeline. Really can.
And it all goes back to that lesson Joe learned from his father. Always try to help as many people as you possibly can. Such a simple message. But it's one that has guided Joe's life and led him to touch the lives of so many people. And what's amazing to me is that he's not doing it for recognition or praise. He's just living out his values. Quietly and consistently.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example of how we can all strive to live a life of service. It doesn't have to be about these grand gestures or heroic feats. It's about those everyday acts of kindness, those small choices we make to brighten someone's day or to make their load a little lighter.
Right. And sometimes the impact of those actions comes back to us in the most unexpected ways. Remember those Christmas cards Joe received from his Meals on Wheels clients?
Yes, what a beautiful gesture.
It really touched him. He even got teary-eyed talking about it. It just goes to show that when we give from the heart, the rewards can come back tenfold.
It creates this beautiful cycle of generosity and gratitude. And it reminds us that even the smallest acts of kindness can leave a lasting impression.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life of Joe Young, let's take a moment to just reflect on what we've learned. His story is such a powerful reminder that quiet strength can really make a world of difference. It's a reminder that we all have the capacity to make a positive impact, no matter our background or our circumstances.
That's right. What small act of kindness can you do today? To brighten someone's day. Or to make their life a little bit easier. Maybe it's calling a friend who's going through a tough time, volunteering at a local charity, or just offering a helping hand to a neighbor in need.
Yeah, because as Joe's story so beautifully illustrates, those small acts of kindness, they can have a ripple effect, creating a more compassionate and connected world one person at a time. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the remarkable life of Joe Young. We hope his story has inspired you to embrace your own quiet strength and find ways to make a positive impact in your own corner of the world. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.